Well, brethren, tomorrow is March 17th, and to most of the world, that means tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. So today, we are going to investigate who St. Patrick was, what St. Patrick believed, and why we as Christians don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. So, who was Patrick? It's important for us to get context on his identity before we investigate what he believed and why we don't celebrate the day named after him. Now, the original St. Patrick, or Patrick as we'll be calling him, was born sometime in the late 300s AD. You're going to see anywhere from 367 to 399 if you Google it. And the reality is, with history this old, if it's not in a book we 100% know is true, like the Bible, can be a little iffy, if you will. So some of the details may vary, but the general story goes as follows. Patrick was Scottish, not Irish. His real name was Maewyn Succat. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but you get the idea. He later changed his name to Patrick when the church sent him on a mission. At the age of 16, Patrick was captured as a slave by Irish raiders and forced into being a shepherd. Later, he escaped slavery and returned to spread his gospel to Ireland. Now, St. Patrick's Day as we know it didn't really become celebrated or recognized by the Catholic Church until around the 1630s. The Catholic Church essentially was looking for a way to get people to celebrate a different pagan holiday, which we're going to look into later. And essentially, they turned it into somewhat what we know of today, not quite, but around the 1630s. This is also where the rumor that he drove all the snakes out of Ireland came from. The original context there being that snakes were the pagan beliefs that at least what the Catholics believed were pagan, and that he drove the paganism out of Ireland. And in the 1840s, during the Irish potato famine, many Irish immigrants came to the United States, and that's where St. Patrick's Day kind of got its start over here in the United States. So now that we know who Patrick was, it's important for us to consider what he believed. I believe now is a good time for me to mention that this sermonette was heavily based on an article you can find on the UCG website. The name of that article is Who Was St. Patrick? Should a Christian Observe St. Patrick's Day? That article, it's honestly probably about a 5-10 minute read, and there's some really great comments on the article and discussion in the comment section that really provides a lot of insight, and I would highly recommend anyone reads it. So, what did Patrick believe? Well, he did have an autobiography, and he did write down some of his beliefs. When he was enslaved as a shepherd, he turned deeply into his Celtic faith. One day, while he was a shepherd, he claimed he heard a voice that he believed was God telling him to escape slavery. So that's what he did. When he got back to his homeland, he was sent on a so-called mission by his Celtic church to Ireland. So we know he was a member of the Celtic church, if he was willing to go on a mission for them, obviously. And it's important for us to figure out what the beliefs of the Celtic church and what his beliefs would have been. The Celtic Church actually predates Catholicism in Ireland. So nowadays, St. Patrick's Day is typically associated with Catholicism, but it's important to note that he was actually Celtic, not Catholic. And it's important for us to figure out what the Celtic Church believes. And it's actually rather interesting. They share a lot of our same beliefs. For instance, the Celtic Church allowed priests and pastors and ministers to marry. They practiced baptism by immersion and rejected common Catholic doctrine at the time, such as the veneration of saints and papal infallibility. They also rejected the Trinity, something that we still deal with today. They also had a strong emphasis on relying on biblical teaching and scriptures rather than human tradition. Rather ironic considering he has a holiday named after him now. Patrick is on record in his autobiography and the Celtic Church also as observing the Saturday Sabbath, Passover, and the dietary laws found in Leviticus. Now, I'm not trying to sell you to converting to the Celtic Church here, so it's important to recognize that they did do some things wrong. For instance, they later did adopt Easter. However, they kind of had gotten an argument with Catholics over what day it was and whatnot, but nevertheless, they still did celebrate Easter. And they believed in the use of the cross. You will see this, it's the normal cross, right, looks like a T. Well, the Celtic cross, if you will, kind of has the knot in the middle, or the circle where the T kind of intersects. That's a general Celtic cross. So now that we know who Patrick was and what he believed, we need to understand why we don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Why we don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And first and foremost, it's not mentioned in the Bible. That's a relatively easy catch-all for us as Christians here for any holiday, whether it be Christmas, Halloween, Easter, things like that. If we don't see it in the Bible, we don't celebrate it. Now, it's important to mention we obviously don't see holidays like Thanksgiving, 4th of July, things like that in the Bible, but those don't have any pagan basis, as we soon will see St. Patrick's Day does. And those holidays often commemorate things like America gaining its independence, or the pilgrims celebrating their fall harvest. Let's go ahead and, if you will, please turn to Romans 12 and verse 2. Again, that's Romans 12 and verse 2. Now, as I said, you're not going to find a scripture in the Bible that specifically tells you, thou shalt not celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but we will find some scriptures that will give us advice. So Romans 12 verse 2 says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable. We're giving a warning here that we need to test and prove what we do, and we need, that we need to test and prove what we do. And I believe this could be applied to our celebrations. It's important for us to realize that we need to be celebrating our God, the way he wants to be celebrated, not through his pagan holidays. And I would venture to say Romans 12:2 here. Obviously, like I said, it doesn't say thou shalt not celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but this is a good catch-all, if you will, for all holidays that people may celebrate, whether it be Christmas, Easter, things along that line. Now, as I said, you're not going to see St. Patrick's Day mentioned in the Bible, and it's pretty easy. Originally when I first wrote this sermonette, that was my entire first point here, is that it's not in the Bible. But last night I was thinking, I wonder if it's based in a pagan holiday, which is a pretty good bet when it comes to worldly holidays. And lo and behold, if you Google it, St. Patrick's Day was originally celebrated as Ostera, the celebration of the spring equinox goddess. Now, you've probably heard of that before in the context of Easter. And essentially, throughout history, what happened is the spring equinox got turned into Easter by the Catholic Church. And essentially, in a bid to get more people to recognize their holiday, they sort of stopped celebrating Ostera and turned it into Easter and St. Patrick's Day. So now that we know that, let's turn to 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 21, if you will. And that's 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 21. Again, this is rather similar to Romans 12:2, and it encourages us to test things. It says, test all things and hold fast what is good. Abstain from every form of evil. Well, when we test St. Patrick's Day, we can see that it's not in the Bible, and its biblical base is based off of a pagan holiday for a goddess. So right away, we know we shouldn't celebrate it. But you could probably venture to argue modern-day St. Patrick's Day has nothing to do with the biblical goddess, as many people try to argue with Christmas or Easter. But what about modern-day St. Patrick's Day? Well, let's turn to Ephesians 5, verse 17 and 18, if you will. Now, modern-day St. Patrick's Day realistically has turned into a drinking holiday. Most of the time, wear green, shamrocks, things like that. You see that. But the reality is most of the time it ends up turning into a drinking holiday. So Ephesians 5, verse 17 and 18, therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is, and do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Here we see the Bible encouraging us not to get drunk. So I went ahead and gathered some stats about St. Patrick's Day. On St. Patrick's Day, and these stats are all from 2023, there is a 174% increase in beer sales, a 153% increase on hard liquor like rum, drinks along those lines. The average American who celebrates St. Patrick's Day will spend $44 per person celebrating. The United States spent around $6.85 billion celebrating St. Patrick's Day last year. That averages to about 8 beers per person at the average restaurant, or 1 beer at a Panthers game. But we can see that the modern day implementation of St. Patrick's Day realistically turns down to being pinched if you're not wearing green and going to a bar and drinking as much as you can. Obviously, that is not something we should be doing, let alone based on the fact that we can see that it was based on a pagan holiday. I hope now that you know more about who Patrick was, what he believed, and why we don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day.